Welcome to Studying Law Around the World. I'm Claudio Klaus. In each episode, I talk with lawyers, law students, and professors from different parts of the world to talk about legal education, careers, and what the profession looks like in real life. We talk about the hard parts, the surprises, and the decisions that shaped their paths. Whether you're planning to study abroad, thinking about working in another legal system, or just curious about how law works around the world, this podcast is for you. This episode of Studying Law Around the World is proudly sponsored by ITL Prep from Emond Exam Prep, the comprehensive resource designed specifically for internationally trained lawyers preparing for the NCA exams. We understand that the NCA accreditation journey can feel overwhelming. You can face many obstacles getting to success. Courses that cost too much, offer too little, or leave you more confused than when you started. That's why Emond Exam Prep created ITL Prep, a smarter, more reliable way to succeed. Our module-based self-study courses and expert-led review sessions are designed by actual law professors, many of whom are ITLs themselves or teach at international law schools. They know the NCA process, they understand your journey, and they've built these courses to guide you clearly through the NCA syllabi, helping you gain the understanding you need to be at your best for success on your exams. With ITL Prep, you'll gain confidence and clarity, whether it's foundational concepts or you're tackling specialized Canadian law topics. It's affordable, it's flexible, it's built with you in mind. And right now, we're offering something special. As an exclusive offer for the Studying Law Around the World podcast listeners, ITL Prep is offering 50% off all courses for the first 50 purchases. Simply use the promo code ITL50 at checkout. Casebooks and other resources must be purchased separately. Visit emond.ca today, that's EMOND.ca, and use promo code ITL50 to claim your 50% discount on NCA exam preparation courses. Today, I have the opportunity to have Carlos Romero as one of our guests. He has recently finished his LLM at the University of Chicago and is now an international associate at White & Case. Thank you so much for taking the time to being with us and to answering some of my questions, Carlos.
Happy to be here, Claudio. I'm actually part of your audience because I've heard so many of your episodes. So it's very nice to be on this side of the microphone today. Honored, happy, and excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And for listeners who are getting to hear about you for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Of course. Well, I'm married, and my wife is also my business partner. And we had 2 daughters, a newborn actually, and we also have a dog. So that's a pretty big part of our family. I'm Mexican, and as you said, currently working at White & Case, an international arbitration practice based in Washington, D.C. And my time at the firm will come to an end by the end of this month, in Halloween, actually. So our plan is to relocate back to Chihuahua, Mexico, where I'm from. I expect to rejoin my wife in our legal translation firm that we started 6 years ago. And I'm open to other business ventures as long as I can be based in Chihuahua. And last but not least, I enjoy talking about LLM programs and careers for lawyers in Mexico and abroad. So that's that, Claudio.
And to jump right into some of the questions that I prepared for our conversation here today, I wanted to ask you about this whole experience, right? So you were a lawyer, you worked with legal translation, and then you decided to start an LLM. So I'd love to start hearing a little bit about that. Looking back, what was that decision like? How did you set yourself up to do that? And University of Chicago is a pretty prestigious university, so I'd love to hear about your story and experience there.
Thanks. I was born in the U.S., raised in Chihuahua, and I moved to Monterrey, Mexico, which is a bigger city, to go to law school. And when I was an intern at a corporate law firm there, I noticed that many partners had LLM degrees. So that was back in 2012. So when I graduated in 2013, I was always keeping an eye on LLM programs. I was very excited about that. But I don't know, time went by and I was not applying, and another year went by and I was not applying. And then I switched jobs a lot. And then I got married to my law school sweetheart. And then at some point, 10 years went by and we were discussing about another program on on a long road trip we had, and she was like all in, very supportive. And at that point, we already had some nice enough savings to pay for the tuition and the living expenses. So we decided to move forward after 10 years. So I started applying to a bunch of law schools, 12 law schools in the US, and I was admitted at some law schools, rejected from some, and whitelisted in others. So I was playing this game of getting like in whitelisted and scholarships and scholarship negotiations. And I learned a lot during that process. And I was first going to Berkeley and then Georgetown, and then finally I was admitted to University of Chicago, and it was like in my opinion like the best law school that admitted me. So I decided to enroll there, and we moved to Chicago. That was the process of moving to the U.S.
Fantastic. And building on this law school experience and what prepared you for the role you currently have as well. I'm curious about, what kind of skills you used up in your day-to-day role, and then also a little bit of the story of how you built them over the years.
Well, the most challenging assignment that I had during my fellowship, so my position is like Latin American fellowship, was to do some research and drafting of an initial assessment, a memorandum regarding some investor-state dispute on Mexican tax law matters. I guess I was very lucky because, first of all, I'm familiar with Mexican law, so that's convenient. And also, I had previous experience as a tax lawyer in Mexico. So I guess that really helped me to cut to the chase, try to do some drafting that was shorter than the usual Mexican long documents that we are familiar with. The simpler drafting was a skill that I wasn't familiar with, but it was easier for me because I understand the substance of the matter in this case. So that was very lucky. And also, I also had experience as in-house counsel in Mexico, and I kind of knew that in-house lawyers prefer shorter documents than those very, very long memorandums. And last, I guess it was very useful to see other documents previously drafted by the firm, and I'm talking about memorandums and also requests for arbitrations because I also was involved in the drafting of the request of arbitration. And seeing other documents, using them as templates was very useful. The feedback from my supervisor was really helpful at that point. So I guess that was the biggest, or most challenging experience I faced as a fellow.
I see. That's so interesting. And something that I've noticed is that you write on LinkedIn about topics related to LLMs, which is so interesting. And as somebody who's very interesting on the programs and into the whole logistics and economics of foreign attorneys studying in North America, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, if a foreign attorney wants to have some work experience in the US after their LLM, what have you seen to be some of the possibilities and maybe even the most realistic path that they can do? And even how do they prepare for that in the first year when they're still in the LLM?
Of course, Claudio. Please prepare for a long answer. Yeah, I'm happy to go back and forth. Well, as many of you know, when you pursue an LLM in the United States, you are able to do like the OPT, the optional practical training. So that allows you to work in the US for 12 months, right? I'm talking about migration wise. If you want to stay longer in the US, you can do that with the H-1B visa, which now it requires $100,000. Luckily for Mexican attorneys and Canadian attorneys, there's a USMCA visa, the TN visa, which doesn't require that fee, right? Having said that, only a very small percentage of LLM students actually land a job in the US. A very, very, very small percentage. And most of the jobs offered for LLM grads are 1 year positions. Very few are permanent positions where LLMs usually, but not always, start as first year associates. In big law, that means a salary $225,000 a year. The big picture, right? In terms of actually landing those jobs, which is the hard part, preparing to land a job in the US usually starts way before starting your LLM. This program is known as Foreign Associate, International Visiting Professional, International Fellowships are usually used by big firms to strengthen their ties with clients or other firms abroad. So you need to understand how these foreign attorney programs work and how can you fit in that logic. What business case can you build and present to US firms to try to get hired, right? So these 1 year positions are usually offered by US law firms to clients. And by that I mean to lawyers working as in-house counsel in usually big companies in your home jurisdiction who which have international disputes or international transactions, and therefore these companies hire U.S. law firms, right? So there's one bucket, like OPT positions offered to clients. And there's also another group of attorneys who work in big law firms in their home countries. These law firms usually work as a local counsel along with U.S. law firms in these big deals, big international deals or international disputes, right? So the law firms want to make friends or strengthen the relationship with this. The U.S. law firms want to do that with this international, I don't know, like Mexican or Canadian or any kind of law firms abroad, and they hire the usually mid-level associates so they can become friends and eventually get some business in the future. And then there's also, in a lesser extent, LLM grads who don't belong to the previous groups, but they have some specific background that is attracted to this US law firms, right? So please interpret whenever you want. So if you are an LLM working at a very big firm or a very big company in your home country, you can ask your supervisors, partners, or the general counsel to recommend you to a US law firm they usually work with. However, if you do that and it actually works, you will be kind of in depth with your supervisor, right? And maybe you will be inclined to return to your previous job after working in the US. However, if you work at a big company or a big firm in your home country and you don't want to go back there after the LLM, you can try finding a job on your own. Maybe a US firm will be happy to have you because they think you have a great background and you will eventually return to your home country and you will land a great job. And that can potentially in the future lead to new business for the US firm, whatever you finish up, you end up working, right? It's in-house or a local firm away. So they take the bet. And well, however, if you don't work at a big company in your home country or a big firm, it's usually way more complicated to land a job. But you need to figure out what in your background can make you useful to US firms, right? Maybe you have experience in a specific industry, like the mining industry, oil and gas, aviation, etc. Maybe you have skills that are in demand at that specific point in a particular firm. For instance, if there's an international disputes firm doing a lot of work in Latin America, maybe at that point, maybe they will be interested in hiring people who speak Spanish, who know the domestic law of a particular country in Latin America, people who have a particular nationality. So in different points of time, different people can be more demand. So what do you need to do as an LLM student or an LLM grad? You need to find out which law firms will be more interested in hiring someone with your background. And how do you do that? Well, I mean, there's no recipe, but you can, for instance, you can go online and Google like US law firm rankings, and then you can see a ranking of big law firms, and then you can choose whatever law firm you want to try first, and type the name of the law firm, and then add Latin America practice, for instance. Wedding case, Latin America practice, or any of that. And then you'll see if there's actually a Latin America practice or a Europe or Asia or Africa, you name it. And you'll find out if they have actually a lot of business going on in your region or your country, and also the name of the partners, the name of the senior associates, and you can actually see which law firms are having a lot of business in your region. And then you can reach out to them proactively. But now you will do so with a more laser focused in which law firms actually will be more likely to hire you, right? They didn't do that back in the day, but I think that'll be very helpful for LLM students to try to don't waste time, right? So I guess, yeah, your turn, Claudio.
All right. So, well, I think I want to say something really quickly that we are obviously as good lawyers, and as a forever disclaimer for the podcast, this is not legal advice. When we talk about immigration here, is just so we can talk about a few educational options. But I really like what you said. first see the different options and see how much of a hassle it will be for the firm to keep you around if they do have an interest in doing that. And then it's interesting to know that because maybe you have to advocate for your case when if you do get an interview and they'll be like, oh, it's going to be really hard to hire you because of immigration purposes, then you already know how the process works and how straightforward it is. So I really like that. But then I like what you just explained of like maybe if you have a specific skill or if you have something that the firm does a lot, that's how you would really connect to the firm in many ways. And I find that to be very interesting. And then you also mentioned about your experience on, working in tax law back home in Mexico and now having to work in a tax research about Mexico in your firm. So it really shows the value of having these foreign associates. And I find it very interesting that you explained a little bit of the, so to say, like politics of these programs, right? And how the firms maintain those relationships alive, which is incredible, honestly. And I'd love to hear, a little more about as you kind of learned about all of these experiences and possibilities, did you also ended up, being in touch with people who were fellows in other offices and heard a little bit about their experience as you went throughout yours? And then we can go on and talk a little more about your experience with LinkedIn. But I have a specific question for that after.
Of course, yeah, happy to talk about that too. Yeah, so when I was applying to the LLM programs, I was in touch with LLM alumni from Latin America. So I ended up meeting a guy from Mexico who went to UChicago as well, and then he landed this fellowship position of case a year before me. So he talked to me about it. I didn't know I didn't know it existed. It was very useful to network with people working in the US a year before me, right? And yes, other classmates from UChicago then landed similar positions, and some in a few extent, some landed permanent positions as well. So it's interesting to know the differences, right? So these positions are usually 1 year, but they're not all equal. Some positions pay more, some law firms pay more, other law firms are more demanding, other law firms are really there's not that much work to do at some point. Some law firms ask you to do stuff which is very challenging, while others is like a pretty first year basic stuff you were doing like a bunch of years ago back in your country. So it's really hard to know. I mean, you cannot get picky, right? If you're lucky to get a position, you usually take it, right? But if you are in a position, very few people do, to actually choose from different programs, it's very useful to talk to people to understand how much are you getting paid, how much is are you paying on taxes, how expensive is to live in that country, how demanding is the job, how many hours you put into it, and how's the work environment. And in my case, it was a fantastic experience. I moved from Chicago to DC. I loved it. I love the work. I love the colleagues. I love the firm. I will really miss this, which was a long time goal to me. And I don't know. I have mixed feelings now that it's coming to an end. Right? Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if I'm missing something, Claudio.
No, that was great. It was super cool to know that the networking aspect of it also played the role on finding this position and learning that this even exists in the first place. I think that's a very important point. It's hard to think about a specific strategy if you don't even know those possibilities exist. So I think that's a great starting point.
And LLM programs are 9 months long, so it what if you are on time, you're already late. You gotta be like 15 minutes earlier to your appointment to actually, I saw the Brazilian guys. They already knew how the U.S. law firm market, how to play the game, and I wasn't familiar with that. Yeah, it's important to understand how it works, how the job fair works, how the networking works, and you don't learn that in.
No, I can definitely see how this kind of information usually stays siloed in some specific places. And it's interesting because you can't blame those who want to kind of keep it among themselves, or you'd have to go to them to talk about it. And then it keeps this kind of opportunity in a select few hands. So I love what is happening. In a way, I try to use my podcast as well as a tool for people, a lot in Canada and then in the US as well, but you really know about the possibilities, right? Because once you know that that's even possible, you know the name of what you look for, then you have, so many resources to go after. But before that, it's really tricky to even know things are possible. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And then I'd love to go on another topic. So you've been writing in Spanish on LinkedIn. or in English as well, about LLMs, careers, fellowships. And it's been really interesting to follow what you've been putting there, be it, numerical statistics or just really the thoughts you've been sharing out there. And I'd love to hear, how did you decide to start that?
Of course, I look up to you too because you always you also put a lot of time into this. At the beginning, I started doing this after the LLM more on a regular basis, and I first started posting about court decisions and statutory amendments, and I quickly realized that nobody cared about that. I always had like crickets in response. So I started posting about my LLM experience and some thoughts, and I quickly realized there was an audience for that. So I started posting more regularly about that, and I didn't sit for the bar, so I had more time during the summer before starting my position at the firm. So I did some research and numbers and all that, and that worked well. And I decided to do it throughout the year for a couple of reasons. First, I wanted to build a network of people who were more likely to answer me a call or respond my messages if there was any business development opportunity that arose. So when I joined the firm, and I'm on parental leave now. That's why I talk like in the past when I was working. So whenever there was a dispute arising in Latin America, I always checked if I had any contact, any people I knew had exchanged some messages via LinkedIn working at that company in Uruguay or Mexico, Chile, or whatever. And if I did, I proactively mention that to my supervisors. Like I know someone working in that firm. We've been in touch. Maybe we can reach out to them to try to figure out if we can be their counsel eventually. I mean, that's a very long shot, but that was the idea to try to make some friends along the way. So every time I post something on LinkedIn, if someone likes it or comment or whatever, I send them a connection request and I start a conversation. And many of those new connections want to speak about LLM programs or careers in the US. And I talk to as many as I can and just hope for the best. And eventually it will lead to a friendship or a business opportunity or whatever. And also, I do this because I know this is temporary, right? Like my position. I'm more popular now that I'm at a wedding case than before. So I'm trying to build a network at this point and try to see if something in if it can uh, if I can build a personal brand now, and then that can bring me to new business opportunities in the future. I want to live back in Mexico, where I'm from, in Chihuahua, and there's not a big legal hub there. So I'm hoping that with the network, I can work remotely for a company, or maybe build something from Chihuahua that doesn't limit to the city I'm based. It can be a nationwide business or international business or whatever. Last but not least, meeting people in LinkedIn, such as yourself, and getting to know people with different walks of life helps you spot new opportunities. So that's the that's my idea, and hopefully, fingers crossed, it will work at some eventually. Because I discuss this with my wife a lot. I put a lot of time into this, but it gets also it's an addiction at some point as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting, the podcast for a long time, and it's true in a realistic way. It is a hobby, right? So it's just being such an interesting thing to do. I just enjoy talking to people and just having the opportunity to do these and share it out. I've talked with a few people where I mentioned that there was a few goals of mine related to these, helping me to talk to other people, helping me to keep consistent at networking and so forth. But it really is that I noticed I was having lots of really interesting conversations. And then I didn't have a way to refer back to those conversations, as well as some conversations just felt too good not to be shared. So that's where, the whole premise of starting a podcast started. And I totally see what you're saying there. And it really becomes an addiction in a way. When we talked about, these possibilities and fellowships and all of that, I ran all these different searches using all the tools I know to see if I could, come up with the ultimate list of like the 100 AM law firms that have those kinds of programs. And, it's just the kind of thing that really, it's just interesting to see what's going on out there in the world, and also the possibilities, and share some good stuff with people out there. So I really shared that passion in a way.
I love that Yes, your podcast has evolved from studying law and now practicing law as well.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. It has. It really has. It's funny. I started interviewing people by asking, how do you become a lawyer in your country? So I had at some point talked with, 14 people. It was part of a law school project. So I would be asking you questions in English, translating my question to Portuguese, and then I would hear your answer and translate your answer to Portuguese right after that. So it was quite the process. By the end of the recording, I was so exhausted. And soon I learned that the audience that was listening to me was mostly one that could understand English, so there was no need to actually be translating it. So when it took off, when really like it took off, and I felt like I should continue on, I decided to continue it in English only, and it's been much easier in a way.
I'm as you said, I'm posting mostly in Spanish because I thought there was a big audience, but I don't know. I always think that at some point maybe I should switch to English to try to land a bigger audience. I'll think about that. Now that you share your process, it's interesting. Thanks, Claudio.
Yeah, I mean, always the good thing is to run some testing, right? Sometimes, even though your audience might be able to read it in Spanish, they might prefer to engage in stuff that is in Spanish instead of English as well. So yeah, there's a lot to see, but yeah, it's definitely a possibility. And before I get to sidetracked here, I thought I'd ask you. So for those lawyers who are now thinking or preparing to do an LLM in the US or to continue their careers, I thought I'd ask you if you have a couple of tips and strategies that what could be done to improve your possibilities and to really maximize those chances of that experience being the best it can be. And if anything, at least that people can make educated choices so they know what's possible and available to them.
If you are thinking about doing an LLM and you're still home country, I'll suggest you try to land a job in one of the biggest firms in your country or one of the biggest companies in your country. That will really maximize your chances of landing a job in the future. So if you are still on time to do that, I will highly suggest doing that. But if you're not, if you're already applying to LLM programs and already studying the LLM program, I will suggest not to focus so much on your grades. And it's complicated because you as an LLM student, the academic experience, right? You want to learn a lot. But you also need to realize if you want to land a job and you don't have it lined up, you need to realize that no one fails in an LLM program. Almost no one. So you don't need to spend all your time studying. And you need to spend more time networking. So I would suggest to attend all this Washington Arbitration Week in conference on a any kind of matters, right? So if you go to happy hours and you go to lunch talks and you spend time meeting people, I think that will be a better use of time than hitting the books in the library. However, there's not much you can do to land a job in the US while you're studying an LM program if you don't have a background that is interesting for the law firms, right? So as I said, trying to land a job in your home country in a big law firm or in a big company will be way more important than whatever you do during your LLM. You can even see people landing these positions, these foreign trade positions, who don't even hold an LLM diploma. Right? So you see what's more important, right? Your background, where you work, or if you earn the most fancy LLM degree.
Amazing. Well, thank you really so much, Carlos, for taking the time to share your thoughts and your experience with this very interesting topic. I appreciate you being in the podcast today, and I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to it.
Thanks, Claudio. It was a really experience to be here. I was very honored to get your invitation, and hopefully we can have a few more conversations in the
We absolutely will. We absolutely will. All right. Have a good one.